Hey guys, it's Mr. Lowry. I wanted to give you a couple hints on your homework assignment for tonight. This is the geometry textbook on page 55, and tonight's homework is 31 through 41. So it starts right here. Now these ones right here are pretty self-explanatory. I want to classify each as, right, acute, or obtuse. Those are going to be definitions from the textbook that we talked about today in class, or that you talked about, or that you looked up at home. These are the ones that I want to set up because these are a little bit harder. These are going to require a little bit of algebra. The algebra is not very hard at all. What's hard here is translating the information that they give you into an algebraic equation. So let's take a look at this here. We got this figure, and one of the pieces of information is that XW bisects angle YXZ. So let's look for those two different shapes. We got a array XW, that's right here, XW, and then we have it bisects this angle YXZ. Okay, now this word bisects is an important word. The word bisects means cut in half. So when an array bisects an angle, it cuts it into two equal halves. So I'm going to draw this out again and kind of show you what we got here. There's a bunch of different lines in here. Sometimes separating the figures out into the pieces that you need is a little bit helpful. So on this piece of paper, I'm just going to kind of create a figure that's similar. I'm going to put a couple points. Oh, sorry. YouTube video just started playing. Got ghosts in the machine. All right, so I'm going to label the vertex X, right? I have this point Y, and I have this point Z. Okay, so that's the angle YXZ, one of the angles that we're talking about, YXZ. I also want this ray XW, and it's going to go right in the middle. So I'm going to put W right here, and then I'm going to draw a ray that goes through that. Okay. What bisects means is cut in half. And so I just created from this big angle, I created two little angles that are congruent to each other. This is the way that you mark congruent angles in a figure. You use like a little arc in the angle to distinguish that those are congruent. Okay? So the fact that this bisects this angle tells us that this angle and this angle are congruent. So I'm going to list that out. I'm going to say that angle YXW is congruent to this other little angle, WXZ. Okay, notice I haven't even started the problem yet. I'm just unpacking the diagram. Okay, so this is true. What that also means is that the measure of angle YXW is equal to the measure of angle WXZ. Okay, so shapes are congruent, measurements or numbers are equal, and so the difference between what I wrote here is that this has an M in front, and this has an M in front. We're talking about numbers, and this is an equal sign, and this is a congruent symbol. Okay, so that's one thing I know. Let's look at the rest of the information. Okay, it also says that XV bisects YXW. So I'm going to make another image here, a smaller one. Okay, and I'm going to label this guy X, and this guy Y, and this guy W. So this right here is just this section repeated. But inside of that, I'm going to draw that other ray XV. Okay, so there's XV. And again, I know that I have two congruent angles. Now, if you have more than one set of congruent angles, you can use like double arcs. So double arcs here and here mean that these two angles are congruent. This arc here and this arc here means that these two angles are congruent. But again, that congruence, I can translate that into a statement. So angle YXV is congruent to angle VXW. Right? YXV, this guy, is congruent to VXW, this guy. Which means that the measure of angle YXV is equal to the measure of angle VXW, okay? And all that information comes from these words bisects. All right, sometimes in math we get so used to just jumping into the problem that we don't bother to read the directions, but in geometry there's going to be a lot of information packed into this and this. And so if you're not paying attention to those, if you're not looking at those, you're going to miss a whole lot of information. All right, let's look at what the problem says now in 35. If yxv is 3x and the measure of angle yxv is 3x, and the measure of angle vxw is 2x plus 6, find the measure of angle yxw. Let's look on our diagram here and see what we got. Okay, we're talking about yxv, and we're talking about vxw. So that means we're talking about this diagram here. Okay? And they're telling us the measure of these angles, right? Yxw, oh, sorry, this was yxv, excuse me. I made a typo there. Yxv and then vxw. Okay, they just gave me the measurements of those. Yxv is 3x, so this is 3x. And vxw, they tell me, is 2x plus 6. So I just was able to set up an equation substituting the measurements of those that they gave me. And it all starts with the word bisects, right? We know that xv bisects yxw, which gives me two congruent angles, which gives me two equal measurements, which gives me an equation. Right? This is the hard part. It's reading into the problem a little bit. Okay, now here is the easy part, the algebra. This is going to be a piece of cake. We're going to subtract 2x from both sides, and we're going to get x equals 6. Cool. Okay, so I solved the equation. The question is asking me for the measure of angle yxw, right? Yxw. Well, I don't know that yet, but I do know that I can find these two angles, right? And they have to be equal. So yxv, this guy, yxv, that is going to be 3x. So 3 times x, or 3 times 6, is 18 degrees. It's 3 times 6. Now this one over here is going to be 2 times 6 plus 6, which will be 12 plus 6, which is still going to give us 18 degrees, which makes sense because they're supposed to be congruent. So by solving this equation and plugging it back into these expressions, I get both this yxv and I get this one, vxw, and they're both 18 degrees. So this one's 18 degrees and this one's 18 degrees. Okay, now what they're asking for in the problem is the measure of angle yxw, the big angle. Well, we have these two small angles, 18 and 18. If we add those together, we're going to get the big angle. So it's going to be 36 degrees here. So the measure of angle yxw is equal to 36 degrees. 18 plus 18, or 18 times 2. Okay, that's the answer to number 35. Now, we didn't use this diagram yet, but my guess is we're going to use that in the next problem, right? So in the next problem, they're giving us the measure of angle yxw and the measure of angle wxz. Well, notice we already have that broken down, right? So this is the diagram I need for 35. This is the diagram I need for 36. So notice the order that I went in here. I started with the given information. I didn't do anything else but just look at that. I didn't even bother looking at these problems. I took this information, bisects, and I took this diagram and I just started breaking it down. I looked at the individual pieces of information separately. I know bisects means cut in half, which means congruent angles, which means equal measurements. Okay? So break it down, and then, once the problem starts asking you questions, you already have a bunch of information that you can use there. All right. So keywords, bisects, that's going to be really important. You can handle 36 and 37. See what you can do on those. Okay, a couple other symbols that we want to look at here. Okay, there's going to be some other algebra stuff in here. Let's take a look at some of that. This number 40 here, we have this symbol right here. That's upside down T. Okay, that means perpendicular. Okay, so perpendicular means that they form a 90-degree angle. So if you look at TW and WZ, we can add a 90-degree angle here. All right. Also, we want TWZ, the measure of it, equals 2c plus 36. So what we have here is an equation. We know that TWZ equals 90, the measure of TWZ equals 90. We also know the measure of TWZ equals 2c plus 36. That's going to help us set up an equation so that we can solve for c. Okay, so again, you got to look at the figure, look at the symbols, and use some inference here. This symbol means perpendicular, which means 90-degree angle, and this has to also equal 90. Okay, 41. Here we have the language, we want a 90 or a right angle. Okay, so if we look at ZWY, that's ZWY, this guy, and we look at YWX, that's this guy, so this angle and this angle, we have to form this right angle. We want ZWX to be a right angle. So these two angles here have to be complementary. They have to add up to 90 degrees because we want this to be a right angle. All right, so we're using these expressions that we're given. We know that this expression plus this expression, these two angles, when we add them up, we have to get 90 degrees. So the hard part is not the algebra. That's the easy part. The hard part is setting up your algebra equation and then solving it. So you have to use the symbols, you have to use the figures, you have to use definitions to be able to apply those ideas in order to set up your equation. All right, so that should help you get set up there and help you set up your equations and solve for your unknowns. See you in class, and if you're not coming to class, I hope you're at home healthy and happy.